Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute Next Round podcast. I'm Tim Anaya, PRI's Vice President of Marketing and Communications. And with me, as always, is our friend Matt Fleming, PRI's Director of Communications. How are you today, Matt?
Good, Tim. How are you?
I am good, and as always, we have a lot to talk about with what's going on in politics and policy in California this week, and we'll start with the latest developments in the governor's race. And it starts with an incident that warms the hearts of Matt and myself as longtime media professionals, and that is the latest disastrous interview of the gubernatorial campaign. And this one is by, I guess we would call him the nominal frontrunner of the Democratic side of the governor's race, Xavier Becerra. And he sat down for I guess it was supposed to be a profile interview on KTLA in Los Angeles, and it went off the rails right from the beginning. Now, we're encouraging all of you to actually go online and watch this clip. It's only about 2 minutes long, but it's, he starts right off kind of lecturing the reporter. This is going to be a profile piece, right? I don't want, all these tough questions. And the reporter pushes back appropriately and says, I have tough but fair questions. Everything I'm going to ask you are questions that any gubernatorial candidate should expect. And the other thing, too, is when he's kind of lecturing the reporter on this, he has this weird, laugh/grin on his face. It's just very cringeworthy, and I think it goes to the things Matt and I have observed in these initial debates, and I think the kind of criticism and doubt you're hearing from Biden administration people, others in the Democratic world, that he's kind of a dud of a candidate, and I think this interview shows that off in great detail. This is an interview that someone like him who's been in politics since the early 90s should understand and be prepared for. Is nothing out of the ordinary by any stretch of the imagination. And you just wonder, gosh, what kind of governor is this guy going to be if he wins? If this is how he reacts to, I don't know, what looked to me like a pretty standard interview. But man, I gotta say, watching that interview, you have been, and I have been there many times before, having to prepare legislators and candidates for, what could be tough interviews. And, I'm sure his handlers were cringing in the back of the room. It's kind of your worst nightmare when you're the media person preparing the candidate or the individual for an interview.
Yeah, it was a delight to watch. And on one hand, that's what you have press secretaries and communications directors to do. That's what you have them for, is they negotiate these things. But also, Becerra, as you mentioned, has been around forever. He was a member of Congress. He was in leadership in Congress, which means that he was used to being asked questions by reporters constantly. Congress reporters are everywhere, and they're just peppering lawmakers with questions constantly. So he should be used to it, and I just don't know what he hoped to accomplish by even saying that. And I think that's the part that's just so strange to me. He should be more media savvy than that. He's wrong about what a profile is, so maybe he just fundamentally misunderstands the media. But, in a profile, they're going to talk about everything. That's what a profile is they kind of talk about you as a person and you as a candidate, and they're going to ask you about campaign issues that, things you don't want to talk about necessarily. They're going to ask about his connection to his former chief of staff who is under a federal indictment for fraud. They are going to ask about his time as HHS secretary and losing tens of thousands of kids into the system. They're going to ask about those questions. Yeah, sure, they'll ask about your accomplishments too, but you should be prepared for those questions. And the fact that he wasn't, the fact that he was doing such a weird way of trying to negotiate him out, to me is just, like we said, he's a dud, and that's proof.
I guess what I don't understand, right, is that these are kind of basic things that you should expect. Certainly, if you're his campaign, maybe he's living in a bubble but it didn't seem like the reporter there was asking anything out of the ordinary. I mean, even look at the setting of the interview. It looked like it would be easy, might be too strong of a word, but it seemed like an interview that he should have been able to complete without having this kind of weird meltdown. And it sort of begs the question, as I said when we started this discussion, I think he's a nominal front runner. There's no question that he has zoomed to the top of the Democratic field, but I don't know. I have a feeling in my bones and what I kind of see out there. I think he's a very nominal front runner. I don't think that people are locked into support for him. There's this phenomenon we're seeing online, right, of Democrats aren't immediately returning their ballots. I don't know if that's a strategy or just kind of a natural, organic thing that's going on. And so you got to wonder people who are soft supporters of his, and, he's been compared to being California's Joe Biden. Does he have a soft level of support that might explore the field a little more watching an interview like this?
Yeah, I mean, as we've talked about it, for a few weeks now, I think he's probably the one that seems like the safest choice, especially since the last front runner went down in flames, Eric Swalwell. I think he probably seems like the safest choice to like the Democratic establishment. But yeah, I mean, you could see it in the reporter's face, like she's wondering why this interview is going off the rails before it's even started. And I think everyone watching it is wondering the same thing. Like she's not doing any, she didn't even ask questions yet, and it's already going off the rails.
You and I would have loved an interview like this for
Yeah.
any of the people that we've worked for.
Yeah, I mean, Tim, I don't know if we've ever talked about this on the podcast, but both of us came up through Republican politics, and it's kind of an inside joke, but it's also sort of true that like Republican comms people have to work twice as hard because every interview is confrontational. Every interview is like a hostile media. And I'm not, again, part of that is it's a little bit of a joke because, obviously, Tim, you and I both had great relationships with lots of reporters who would just be fair and ask normal questions. But there is some truth to it where it's like every interview has the potential of going off the rails really, really fast because so many reporters love to hone in on these, misperceptions about Republican candidates. And Democrats, it's always like, the questions are always like, oh, why are you so awesome? Or which of all your many accomplishments is your favorite? It's always questions like that. And so for it to go off the rails so fast, it's kind of remarkable. And I think it does speak to what a dud he is.
I mean, it really, to me, looked like it was the political version of what do you like better, kittens or puppies? I mean, you even look at the setting of the interview. He was in, like weekend attire. This was not going to be a gotcha interview. And that was pretty obvious from sitting down. And, his reaction to that certainly, I think, leaves a lot of people wondering, is he ready for prime time here? What kind of governor would he be? It's also getting comparisons with the infamous, disastrous Katie Porter interview from earlier in the campaign with Julie Watt. In fact, the Matt Mahan campaign made kind of a comparison video of the two interviews and making the point, that these candidates should not be so thin-skinned that they can't handle tough but fair questions about their records and about their agenda. You've written about kind of a point that supporters of Katie Porter are making that Katie Porter's interview and the other infamous video of her screaming at her staff for being in her shot, it leads to real questions about her likability. And some of her supporters are making the charge that, well, you don't look at the likability of a man. This is a very sexist observation that you're making. She's being held to an unfair double standard. You wrote a column on this recently. Kind of what are your thoughts on this? Do you think that is an unfair double standard that someone like a Katie Porter is being held to compared to a Becerra or a Steyer or some of the other leaders in government and in the business world?
I don't. I know that that is a common thing to say that there is this double standard for women, and I don't want to get into whether or not that statement on its face is true because it's such a broad statement and we could be here all day talking about that. I will say in terms of Katie Porter, negative hits stick when they reinforce existing stereotypes, and rightly or wrongly, comes off as unlikable. We don't know if this is going to derail Becerra like it seems to have derailed Katie Porter. I will say the difference, though, is as you mentioned, he is sort of smiling and looks sort of dumb, but he doesn't look like he's berating her. The interview, the one with Katie Porter that was so disastrous was her screaming and using the F word at her staff member, and her staff member's trying to warn her from saying something that's wrong. This is also on top of the fact that Katie Porter was accused by her ex-husband of dumping hot mashed potatoes on his head. She was also, there was text messages leaked of her abusing the mayor of Irvine. She also fired a staff member for allegedly giving her COVID. This is like a junior staffer. She has a long history of being unlikable. She's best known as a person in congressional hearings who would lecture people with a whiteboard, which was insufferable, and then she would beat up on CEOs and other business leaders who aren't really in a position to fight back because it doesn't really help them to sit there and pick a fight with a member of Congress. So she is a bully. It's who she is. It's not a double standard. It's just a fact. Do other certain male candidates get away with being jerks? I mean, maybe, but none of them have this history of being horrible bosses that I am aware of, right? I don't think of it as a double standard. They're just revealing who she appears to be.
To that point, I've encountered in my career in politics and public policy just as many female screamers as male screamers, just as many female jerks as male jerks. So I think it transcends gender. And I think what's unusual in the Porter case is that we saw it, and that's kind of how she really is. And, a campaign in many senses, it's a performance. You're putting only your best foot forward. It's a job of reporters to pierce through that veneer and try to get an honest look at the candidate and who they are and their record and what they want to do. Look at the example of former state senator Carol Migden. She was known as like one of the worst bosses in the history of the legislature, screamed at people from the dais as the chair of the Appropriations Committee. Things got so bad that the Senate Rules Committee took her responsibility for managing her staff away from her. Remember, she also had the infamous road rage incident driving on I-80 one day back to Sacramento. That's an example of a female boss, a female politician who was out of control. There is also a male one, former Secretary of State Kevin Shelley, notoriously was a horrible, horrible boss. Had to get anger management training. So ultimately, karma caught up with him with his scandal as Secretary of State. But there's a lot of horrible bosses who are men. There's a lot of horrible bosses who are women. I think it just speaks to you and your character and what you're doing.
And to that point, like there was coverage this week of people making the claim that sexism is holding Katie Porter back for this exact reason. There's this double standard. And the truth is like what a lot of people were saying was that on the debate stage, you just have a bunch of men shouting over each other while she's sitting back quietly. And like part of that is reputational management on her part, right? Like she has a mess to clean up because of these videos. So she has to look a little bit more diplomatic. But more than that, like it's not the same thing to say a bunch of candidates on a debate stage screaming over each other is the same thing as a person abusing their staff. And if you think it is the same thing, then you don't really understand power imbalances, and you really kind of lost the right to talk about whether it's the same thing. To the best of my knowledge, there is no one accusing any of the other candidates of being a horrible boss. Although I will say, our buddy Tony Thurmond was accused of actually creating a toxic work environment, and I think that would probably be people would be talking about that a lot more if he actually mattered in the race, which he does not. But past that, no one else has been accused of being a bad boss. If someone said Tom Steyer was a bad boss, I probably wouldn't be shocked because he comes off as very unlikable as well. But so far no one has said anything like that. So it's not really a double standard because there's not a man on the other side getting away with it right now.
And don't forget that during the debates, Katie Porter has landed her share of rhetorical punches too.
Yeah.
So it's not like she's just, an innocent person talking about policy while these male bullies are screaming on the stage. She's been a fully engaged debate contestant too.
And there was that one moment where I don't remember the context, but she said she was in a back and forth with Bianco, and she said something like, "Don't lecture me on being a mother," and he said, "Well, maybe I should." And that was an inappropriate comment from him. She was kind of looking for a scripted moment, which was fine, but like, he shouldn't have said that. But I don't know. I mean, is he thriving where she's not? They both seem like they're in the same kind of spot. So I don't know. I just think people they want sexism to be behind the reason why she's not doing well in the same way they wanted sexism to be behind why Hillary Clinton didn't win and why Kamala Harris didn't win. And the truth is they had their own baggage. Katie Porter has her own baggage. As I wrote in my column, there's two sides to every story, but it does seem like one side seems to be saying the exact same thing, which is that Katie Porter publicly and privately has a real temper and is a real condescending lecturing person.
We'll get back to Next Round in just a moment, but first, are you getting PRI's regular email updates? If not, go to pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get the facts you need to fight back delivered every week to your inbox. Every week, PRI sends you what you need to know about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento, and gives you the free market ideas needed to save our state and our nation. By going to pacificresearch.org and clicking the sign up button, you can sign up to have Policy Alert, our weekly roundup of all the best ideas from PRI scholars delivered to your inbox. Or you can sign up for event updates so you're the first to know when PRI is coming to your community with great events. So sign up now at pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get PRI's content delivered to your inbox each week.
So let's look at kind of where we are today. What is it? We're about 3 weeks now out from the governor's race, a little less than that. And we had two new polls come out today on Wednesday the 13th as we tape this. The first is a very interesting Emerson College poll that when you add in people who are committed to a candidate and people who are leaning one way or the other, we actually have two Democrats leading the race. Xavier Becerra is at 20.3%. Tom Steyer is at 18.9%. Steve Hilton is in third place at 17.7%. Porter's at 13.1%. Bianco's at 12%. Mahan at 9.3%. And you have another poll from David Binder, who's a longtime respected Democratic pollster. He has Hilton at 23, Becerra 22, Steyer at 15, Bianco 13, Porter at 12, Mahan at 7. And we've talked about this a bit over the weeks we've been covering the governor's race. There was all this energy, media, oversaturated coverage of the infamous Paul Mitchell, I don't know what you would call it, algorithm machine, trying to show that, could we have top two Republicans in the governor's race? Well, we've said, and this poll is proof of the fact that don't be surprised if you have top two Democrats and Republicans shut out of the governor's race in the fall. I think it's unlikely, but it is definitely a plausible scenario, and that's why I think people are starting to spend money. I've been getting mail from left-leaning groups attacking, quote, Republican Steve Hilton as a, quote, Trump Republican. And they're not really attacking him. They are trying to boost his standing among Republican voters. It's the old phenomenon from Harry Reid and Claire McCaskill in the past where Democratic politicians and left-leaning groups are trying to pick their fall opponent, and they know if you have their preferred D versus an R, the D is highly likely going to win. Matt, what do you think about where we are now about 3 weeks out? Are we getting to this weird scenario where, hey, we might actually have two Democrats in the fall election?
Yeah, I think what polling consistently shows is that it's still a pretty close race. I do think that Becerra and Hilton are probably the front runners at the moment. But I think for Becerra in particular that support is softer than it may seem. He's benefiting, I think, from having not a lot of great alternatives on the Democratic side. But and you also don't know, none of these polls are polling all of the lesser candidates. I think in 2018, the no-name candidates polled about 4%, something like that. And in a race where we're talking everybody is within the margin of error, that could really, that could be the difference between, one candidate getting through and one candidate not getting through. I mean, I wouldn't say anything definitely is going to happen, but yeah, two Democrats getting through, I have always thought was a real possibility. And it continues to be a real possibility, although who knows what's going to happen at this point.
Remember, there's, what is it, 49 people running for governor, and these polls ask about 7 or 8. Everybody who's on the ballot, including Eric Swalwell, including Betty Yee, are going to get thousands and thousands of votes. And collectively, I think 4% is actually kind of low for what these other candidates collectively will receive. Remember, they're getting 0.5% each, 0.25% each, among 40 people. Well, that adds up to 6, 7, 8, 9, as much as 10%.
Yeah, especially Swalwell and Yee, who have some name ID. You'll remember that Leland Yee in the Secretary of State race in what was that, 16, 18, something like that, 14, he got a significant number of votes after a federal indictment for running guns and doing all kinds of stuff and dropping out of the race. So, yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I mean, it's not going to be, none of these lesser known candidates are going to win, but they could draw some support. And, again, Tony Thurmond, I mean, if he gets 3%, something like that, I mean, all that can really be a spoiler in the long run. So nothing is really settled yet.
I think that's right. And I think these future debates, I think, what is there, 1 or 2 more debates on the schedule? They could play an important role in this. What we haven't talked a lot about is that, are people really engaged in this race at all? I don't get the sense that people are really, it's not a presidential race level of interest. It's getting a decent amount of coverage, but I bet if you walk down the street and talk to a stranger, not in the city of Sacramento, because we're a political town, but if you walk down the streets of Hayward and ask them about the governor's race, I bet it would take you a bit to find someone who has been following the race with any real interest. And so you wonder what turnout is going to be, and is this support that we're seeing in these polls, how soft is it? There's a lot more life to come in this race with 3 weeks to go.
I think you're right. I think this could also be one of those ones where people just aren't really that motivated, and a lot of people just end up not voting because it's on their table, they keep putting it off, and they just never get around to it.
Now, the other major race that is getting national attention is the LA mayor's race. And we've had in the last week, we had the big debate, the NBC Telemundo debate, which I had the chance to watch while I was down in LA for a PRI event. And it was very interesting, to say the least. Here's a shameless self-promotion for you that I've never been able to say before. As I wrote in my latest op-ed for the Washington Post, Spencer Pratt, you would think is kind of a reality star and would give you that kind of vibe in the debate. He actually, though he came across, some of the points he made were kind of simplistic, he had very solid critiques of both Karen Bass and Nithya Raman. He didn't have, like he was a Harvard debater level of facts and figures and comebacks, but the points he made are the points people are experiencing in their lives. And when he challenges Bass's record on crime and homelessness and the wildfires, and challenges what Nithya Raman is saying, I think a lot of what he says transcends normal partisan politics. Yes, it's an overwhelming blue city. Yes, he has a real uphill battle if he makes the general election. But I think after watching that debate and you saw his solid performance and Our friend Melanie Mason from Politico, she was interviewed about who were the winners and losers of the debate, and she thought Pratt had a very impressive debate performance. Sure, the bar was low, but I think he has a real shot to make this runoff in June. I think the other thing is if you look at the new Emerson College poll that just came out, Karen Bass is still polling at only 30%. And then the race right now, it's Bass 30, Pratt 22, Rama 19 with 16% undecided. I think if she's banking on a lot of people are going to hold their nose and vote for her, I don't know that's the case. And I wouldn't be surprised if Pratt and Rahman make the general election, and Bass loses in June. She's a very weak incumbent. She's not coming across well on the campaign trail. The issues of the campaign are not traditional R versus D issues. They're basic competence, and she's really failing on all of those issues. Matt, what's your take on the LA mayor's race about 3 weeks out from election day?
Yeah, Tim, I think you framed it nicely. And again, to all of our listeners, go check out Tim's op-ed in the Washington Post today. It's really interesting. I'm with you. I think she's in real trouble. I think even if they hate her in a head-to-head matchup between someone who's billed as a MAGA Republican, I think voters would probably still turn towards her in large enough numbers. But I think you're right that her approval is low, and rightfully so. She's done a terrible job. And she faces a real challenge from Rahman, and that there's a real chance that Rahman and Pratt could make it through to the top two. That which would be that in itself would be a seismic shift in Los Angeles politics. A socialist versus a MAGA Republican. It'd be pretty wild. But yeah, I think Bass is definitely in trouble, and rightfully so.
Yeah, and Rahman didn't have a very good debate performance at all. She was very scattered. Pratt hit her on, you were talking about the record on homelessness, and apparently she's the chair of the relevant city council committee. And he rightfully asked a question, well, you're the chair of the committee. If you're not doing anything with that power, well, what are you doing? And I think that's a very relevant point. It's a very wild race, and we'll see what happens on election night in June. But I don't get the sense that you're going to see a lot of people holding their noses and going for Bass, at least in June. I think people are kind of fed up in their basic quality of life issues. And, the solutions on those really transcend politics. I think people have that basic expectation of we're going to have clean and safe streets. We're going to have a welcoming downtown. We're not going to have our homes burned down due to government incompetence. And Bass is kind of the poster child for all of that. And not all of these things started on her watch or got worse on her watch, but certainly she's the mayor at the time when people are demanding results and demanding better. And you just don't see a lot from her getting it to turn the corner. I mean, I assume she's going to lean into identity politics and kind of wokeism and kind of the standard Democratic left playbook. But when you have a viable socialist challenger, that's a harder, that course is not going to be as effective as you think it might be. That might work in the general election against Pratt, but also Pratt doesn't really come across as a MAGA Republican. He's living in the trailer, right? Because thanks to Karen Bass's leadership, his home burnt down. So, I think it's going to be a wild June and a wild November, whatever happens. But the key thing is Karen Bass is in real trouble.
Absolutely.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Gavin Newsom. This is a kind of a big week for him. He's going to be releasing this week the May Revise, which is the revised state budget proposal incorporating how we did with tax collection and where the economy is and forecasts of where the economy and revenue is going to go. That's more updated after April. And in kind of looking at this, Gavin Newsom has been kind of throwing cold water on Democratic legislators' plans to have all of this new spending. Yet, this is his last budget. He's on all about legacy building. And so we can probably expect that it's going to be, well, a house of cards budget might be too strong a term, but there's definitely going to be some creativity in his budget proposal. There's definitely going to be a lot of issues passed to the next governor. And our Wayne Weingarten has been reviewing the state's finances, reviewing kind of what Newsom is expected to propose. And what you see is even though revenues going up, we're about $8.6 billion up, and that's a good thing. But all the issues on the table are about spending. It's spending on high-speed rail. It's spending on the electric vehicle tax credit that went away at the federal level, but the state wants to backfill. It's California Teachers Association, who, after settling the teachers' strike in LA a few weeks ago, they're expecting the state's going to come in and give them over $1 billion more to pay for the raises that were promised. It's high-speed rail, right? That's now estimated to cost $231 billion. So it's all the issues on the table are spending, and the more that we lock California into these ongoing spending priorities and commitments and that have no real results and show no prospect for delivering, we're in for a real budget mess. And so Newsom may rhetorically talk about keeping spending under control, but I don't see any evidence that we're actually going to do it. And certainly what we've seen from the budget plans put forward by the legislature, they want to spend more money and they're also not afraid to tax. Matt, how does the budget look to you as we kind of turn now to the final stages of enacting this year's budget?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, Tim. You hit all the right points. The only thing I'd add is, in addition to legacy building in California, Newsom is profile building nationally for his run for president. So, he's going to do a lot of, as you love to put it, oversized check presentations. He's going to do a lot of, headline grabbing proposals that may or may not make any sense. And he's going to be doing anything he can to bolster support for him nationally. So look for anything that kind of helps out the unions, anything that he can do to kind of bolster his environmental credentials. He's got a Democratic primary he's trying to win. So I don't expect any sort of austerity or sensible budgeting to come through in this final time.
And to that point, we had a great example of a virtual check presentation a few days ago with the governor's announcement that we are going to be giving diapers, and lots of them, to the parents of newborns across California. And it's another example of, Newsom kind of leaning in with an initiative where government really shouldn't be getting involved. It's kind of poorly thought out. There are questions about just how workable and realistic this proposal is. It's a perfect example of what I write about in my book about Gavin Newsom and the California way. You've been following Newsom's diaper plan. Give our readers a little taste of, well, what is it and what are some of the problems with his proposal?
It just doesn't make sense. I mean, so there are already a lot of nonprofit groups who are making sure that people with high needs have access to diapers. I mean, look, that's a thing that hopefully I think we can all agree on, is that, diapers are something that are pretty essential to child rearing. Certainly you can use cloth diapers, but they're gross and they don't work that well. We learned that in the 60s, as my mom told me. But it's unnecessary, right? There are already groups doing it, and Newsom wants to give them to everyone, which would mean that, if my wife and I were to have a third kid, we would get 400 free diapers from the hospital, but at a significant markup, because now we've got them, we've already paid for them through our own tax dollars, but now we get them at a significant markup because we have to pay for all the bureaucratic administration stuff for Newsom to administer this program. Not to mention the fact that it puts this weird burden on hospitals to have to store all of these diapers. It's not something that somebody feels like dealing with leaving the hospital. You've got your baby and now you've got to deal with 400 diapers, which isn't too big, but it's an inconvenience when you're leaving the hospital. And again, it really doesn't make sense. It's Newsom trying to grab headlines. The legislative analyst's office last year when he proposed this was like, "Why are you doing it? It doesn't make any sense. It's expensive. It's silly." But expensive and silly, they are not things that Newsom spends his time worrying about.
That's a perfect metaphor to end our podcast on this week. I think we have another interesting week ahead of us on the campaign trail. I'm sure we'll be getting more polls, there'll be more developments, more interesting happenings in the governor's race. So thank you all for joining us for this week's episode of Next Round, and I hope you'll tune in next week for our pre-Memorial Day edition of Next Round. Exciting stuff as we get closer and closer to Election Day. Thanks so much for joining us.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Itchon. Hope you'll come back again for Next Round with PRI.